Hi, everybody. I'm an addict named Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, thank you
Hi, Nancy.
for inviting me. And so a little bit about me. I live, recover, and serve in the New Jersey region. And I am a conference participant right now. I'm serving as the regional delegate for NJRSC. And I know we want to talk about the World Service Conference. So um, I think what we talked about is we'll just give a synopsis as to how things evolved and what our experience was, where we're being told things will go from here. And I'm hoping we can do that really fast because I think it would be more useful to be available for some questions, right? For, because I'm never quite sure if the information that I'm giving is the information that you want to hear. So I'm going to refer back to the report that I provided to my region a few weeks ago. And it was normally the conference, the in-person conference is held the last week of April. And it was on March 15th that NAWS confirmed that the WSC in-person meeting is canceled. We had a conference participant webinar already scheduled for March 28th, where we were expected to discuss the upcoming deficit budget. And they had, World Services had polled the participants on some questions. Do we stick with the March 28 plan? And if we do that, do we support virtualizing WSC 2020 for the most urgent business? Now that was one of the key questions. And then it asked about car-related decisions, cat-related decisions, a NAWS report, and elections. And for those of us that are newer, when we say car-related, that's conference agenda report that comes out after Thanksgiving here in the States and usually early January internationally, where it has a report of what world is working on and motions that are to be voted on at the conference that come from both the World Board and individual regions. And when we talk about CAT related, CAT is the what they call the conference approval track, which is an additional group of motions that are going to be addressed during what used to be referred to as new business at the conference. And for the most part, that's World Services project plans. So the questions were, do you support virtualizing? And it was a very informal poll, and 70% of the responders wanted car-related decisions discussed. A lesser percentage wanted cat-related decisions discussed. So that was just to prepare us for our March 28th conference participant webinar, which is a new process that World Services has been doing every couple months. It's not consistent. We're now being told that this will be a bi-monthly consistent practice, and we'll see. So on March 28th,
not long enough.
we
What?
had our
Long enough. It's only like that long.
So on March 28th, we had our webinar together, and their World Services did actually share explicitly what they felt about what was important. They had a different take on whether elections are important and needed to be addressed, car and cat decisions. And one of the main concerns, though, was the budget. There is a provision in the FIPT that the trustee, which would be World Services, shall give a full written report of its activities to the trustor, which is the fellowship, and this report should be delivered to all participants of the World Service Conference at or before its biannual meeting. And the report will include a year-end financial, a description of their activities, and a budget and project description for trustee activities planned for the upcoming conference cycle. So there was voiced concerns that if we don't hold some sort of World Service Conference meeting, how will World Services meet that requirement? And they also did acknowledge and express greater sensitivity at this present time to not meeting their trustee requirements as noted in the FIPT. So following that meeting on March 28th, another poll was sent out, and that was considered a decision on what we were going to address, and do we support proceeding virtually, which close to 90% of the participants said yes. If a virtual partial WSC is approved, do you support conducting discussions and decisions on the minimum, specifically an emergency budget and the project plans outlined in the 2020 CAT? Now, my understanding as a participant was that those would be two totally independent decisions. So close to 90% voted yes. But I know just from experience with the meetings is that a lot of RDs felt almost like it was part of their responsibility to review this budget based on the FIPT provisions and the Guide to World Services. So we're willing to virtualize a partial meeting to discuss these things because we're in this lose-lose situation right now due to COVID. And but that was the decision that allowed all the project planned polls to enter the virtual WSC. And it was unfortunate, in my humble opinion, that it was grouped together. And that there's also an open item with the FIPT moratorium clause that was decided in 2018 that was related to the South Florida inspection request. And there was extensive discussions on the floor of the World Service Conference in regard to the inspection, and one specific area was the provision in the operational rules that one region has the authority to request an inspection. I know that there was a lot of fear on the floor of that great authority being given to one region. And again, my opinion, but based on my participation in the discussion, is that the information we were receiving at the time from World Services with the estimated cost of what this inspection would cost and the involvement in responding to it set off a lot of fear. So there was overall agreement that, at least consensus agreement, that the inspection clause being allowed by one individual region should be reviewed. But if it's not one, what's the number? Is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 20? Is it 100? What is the number? That was never decided. But the only thing the conference really decided is that it's a realistic discussion to hold. And pending that, a moratorium was placed for that conference cycle on the inspection clause. So that would also respond to some fears that, look, probably a large majority of the fellowship didn't know that that inspection clause existed. And now all of a sudden that we all do. What happens if we're flooded with inspection requests? So that satisfied that, but that's going to expire at the close of WSC 2020.
Yes,
so what do we do with that? So 70% of the members did decide that they would be willing
I know to unmute myself on the next one.
reconsider the end date of the moratorium close. In other words, extend it a little bit until we figure out how and what a WSC will happen because of this. And at this time,
I did too.
COVID developments were changing literally daily.
Trying to count money and listen.
So we also agreed at that time that we were going to hold the World Service Conference at the same time that it would be normally scheduled, and we would do it virtually. Now, the one thing on the March 28th webinar is that it was always scheduled to discuss the deficit budget, which is something we never got to. And our executive director of World Services said that they weren't really ready to present it. The situation, the conditions were changing daily. They're still working on it. We'll have it to you before the beginning of the virtual WSC, which we did get it. It was after the WSC actually began. And so April 8th, sorry, we're in April now. We got the responses to the poll, because again, they're doing everything by poll. And it was decided that the majority was in support of holding a virtual meeting, that the emergency budget / project plan is approved to be discussed. The FIPT operational rules was approved, and the time frame for how we would do it, 2 sessions per day. There were Sunday, Wednesday, Sunday. There were 6 days scheduled with 2 sessions per day of 2 hours apiece. That's 12 hours. And at the time while we meet, we would decide what to do with the card decisions. A lot of the polls, a lot of the responses in the polls and the tallies were taken as decisions, but the decision from the participants on addressing the car motions was not one of them. So we were told we would make a decision on how to address that during our meeting. So the conference then took hold, and of course the very first motion was to give ourselves the authority that we didn't have the authority to give ourselves. But I also understand that desperate times call for desperate measures. And I think one of the biggest disparities in a lot of this discussion was that we had all agreed that there was some essential business that needed to be discussed. So define essential. And what I learned is that my definition of essential was not the same as some others. In my region, we were understanding essential business to be, look, what do we need to do to keep the lights on? And what do we need to do to just adhere to and confirm with our legal requirements, and everything else can wait. But, you know, again, group conscience always prevails. Doing this level of service, I've gained greater and greater experience with accepting group conscience. And So there were several developments in the conference that I think are important to remind us that when we take issue, speak up. And one was the limited involvement. I mean, some regions were really adamant that the alternate delegates should be able to have some sort of way to participate and communicate and share when necessary. And that was not originally supported by the hosts of the conference, but that did prevail. So look, we addressed the budget. I can say that the format for the meeting was, to say it was less than ideal, it is an understatement. I started referring to what I was doing as chat bombing, only because I was trying to get in the queue, and how do you ask a question, and how do you be heard, and they're cherry picking on the queue, but how do you even know they saw your hand? And that requires a lot of work on how to fine tune that and make it more an evenly tempered discussion forum. And I know that my zone met 2 nights ago, and one of the things that we will all be pushing for the majority of our regions in the Northeast zone is that if this format and this platform is going to be continued, then it needs work, and we want to be a part of how that transpires. We did not ultimately decide as a conference what we're going to do with the car motions. We have till the end of May to input comments about some questions that were posed, and then we will be expecting another e-poll. I have no way of directing my region whether or not it's going to play out the way some of us might expect it to. That's just a reality. And so the best we can do is send in our input, which we are doing. I know a lot of our zonal members are doing the same. And look, in my region, car motions are done by group tally. And we believe in the voice of the membership, to where, we workshop the RCMs and the GSRs, and the RCMs workshop the GSRs and the group members, and then every group in our region sits down at their home group with their home group members. And for most of us, we schedule like an hour a week for X amount of weeks and go through the car motions with the individual home group members. And then they fill out a tally. They could text it to me, email it to me. We have an online poll on our statewide website where they can put it in. We have 20,000 different ways you can get the votes to me. And the hope is that we can get as many of our home groups to participate in that as possible. And when those votes are tallied, that's the conscience of the New Jersey region. And unless a motion on the floor of the conference radically flips upside down and changes, who's ever in the role of casting that vote on the floor of the conference casts it based on that information. We share it with the region wildly. So a lot of our members feel that that's their only means of getting their voices heard in World Services efforts. And right, wrong, or indifferent, whether it's smart or not smart, that's their belief. So based on that, they feel really, really strongly that the car votes should be heard. So whether I agree with that or not, I will continue to fight and push to have that heard, especially since so many project plans were voted on. and if we have an opportunity to make decisions based on what you consider important, maybe it's just as critical that we make decisions based on what we consider important, even though a large majority of us believe that beside the fact that we're doing this virtually, we have no handle on how any of this is really, really managed in a proper way, not to mention the extreme budget deficit that is facing world services, and that was before COVID hit. Why are we dealing with any of this? When all we know here in New Jersey that our #1 priority from the day our state started to experience the tragedy up until this moment is how do we get our groups to continue to meet? How do we support them on the online platforms? How do we make sure that the information that we're posting on our websites is accurate? How do we keep track of what do we do with the database that we have that we've worked painstakingly hard to keep accurate, so when that newcomer reaches out and says, where's a meeting, and they pull it up and they go to that meeting, that it's there. How do we maintain that? Do we start from scratch? What do we do? How do we keep our members connected? So where in the grand scheme of that critical essence does all this fall? So, I know as a trusted servant, I'm juggling this as best I can. I'm trying to stay in touch with as many of my members as I can, and slogging through this whole process as best as I can. But one other thing that I know, it was during the conference participant webinar that it was brought up extensively that at the actual in-person WSC, there is a gallery for visitors and spectators. And there is no way that we can consider holding a virtual WSC without acknowledging the need to have that access. And that was not something that was on World Services viewpoint, but it was really, really pushed and encouraged. And that's where the YouTube stream came from. And yeah, there's 10,000 different things we can talk about that, and that it was removed immediately. But sometimes I focus on the small gains, and that facet was brought in after the fact because it was pushed for so greatly. To the degree where I have RCMs in my region who now want me to push that there be a live stream of every conference participant webinar that we have moving forward, which I will do. I hope some of that helped. I'm here if you have any specific questions, and thank you for your time.